Now this is connecting a dot that all of you better listen to very carefully if it's the last thing you learn today. And that is that there is an overarching agenda that was hatched in the 50s. Remember that psychological warfare document and its value? That was hatched in between 53 and 56 to create the specter of a threat from outer space that does not exist. Wernher von Braun stated on his deathbed, and we have the testimony of his assistant, that and said, they will first have the Cold War, then we decided there would be nations of concern, then global terrorism. We have this testimony from before 9/11. Then that would be followed by threats from outer space. They'll start talking about asteroids and things of this sort, but the ultimate one they're going to play is the alien threat, and it's all a lie, and it's all a hoax.
The strategy that Wernher von Braun taught me was that first the Russians are going to be considered to be the enemy. In fact, when I met him in '74, they were the enemy, the identified enemy. We were told that they had killer satellites. We were told that they were coming to get us and control us, the dirty commies, that whole story. First, the Russians were the enemy against whom we're going to build space-based weapons. Then terrorists would be identified, and that was soon to follow. We heard a lot about terrorism. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern. But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would be needing to build space-based weapons. And the next enemy was asteroids. Now at this point, he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids, against asteroids we're going to build space-based weapons. So it was funny then. And the funniest one of all was against what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final card. And over and over and over, during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving his speeches for him, he would bring up that last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens. And all of it, he said, is a lie. A lie.
But in order for the lie to work, they have had to create a body of disinformation, false information, and frightening scenarios and actual events that would be convincing to our policymakers like Reagan, convincing to the average person, and to the UFO public that consumes videos, entertainment consoles, movies, etc. And that has been the 50 to 60 year plan. Don't forget that no less a figure than Douglas MacArthur in his last address to the Congress said World War III will be interplanetary. So they have been wanting to provoke an interplanetary conflict for as long as I've been alive, and I'm no spring chicken. And, all right, so this gets into a huge problem of how people consume information and can be manipulated through fear. Because if you look at the roots of human warfare, the early days and even today, it's people abducting a tribe's women, raping them, abusing them sexually, etc., and so on. This is all stuff that they are simulating and saying that the ETs are doing through these abduction scenarios. It is 100% being done by military special operations that are this paramilitary force. And this is the deep end of the pond. Now, when I discovered this back in 1994, now this is 21 years on, I was told by someone in the intelligence community, don't talk about that, because that's what's really dangerous for you. And it's also what will discredit you, and it will also cause them to hate you the most, because you're defanging their whole war plan. The next big war is not terrorism, it's interstellar. And if you expose that it's a hoax, it takes all the steam out of their plan. I said, yes, but if we don't, we're cooked, because there's no way you can have war that's interstellar and survive it. It'd be worse than mutual assured destruction, because the technologies are 1,000 times worse than a hydrogen bomb. So I said, look, we're going to have to figure out how to deal with this. And the only way I know how to do it is put the sunlight in there and let people know what the truth is. So a man came along. If we go to the next slide. And you probably have seen this. It's up on our website. When we first put it up, it had over 600,000 views. The next day, the intelligence community went in and said there were 6,000 views. By the way, if you believe the metrics on Google and YouTube, I have a bridge to sell you. It's all can be manipulated because it moves you down the search engines. So when this hit, within a couple of days, had 600,000 views. This man, William Pollack, his name is pronounced Powlick, was a man, very good man, who gave me an interview only to be released posthumously after he died. And not long, a few years ago, I got a letter from his wife, significant other, I guess, they weren't technically married, with a death certificate and a letter giving me permission, and he had passed away. And I have a lot of these, you know, and I honor my word about keeping a confidence. So what happened is that he gave me this interview, and in it, he talks about the development of RF radio frequency chip implants back in the 70s and 80s. And when he was developing, it was totally an accidental thing that happened. It was with a company that developed it. He then got called into the CIA, and they started doing special programs for the CIA to develop it. And at a certain point, Siemens in Silicon Valley manufactured 2 billion of them, with a B, of these RF chips. And the way they work, I mean, they can be so miniaturized, you could eat something with it, it has a radio free, and it can transmit not only where you are, but the really advanced ones have a neurophone capability to control thought and behavior. Very sinister stuff. So you can actually do a lot of psychological warfare with these RF frequency chips. Now that was the early stages in the 70s and 80s. Now you figure, you know, 40 years later, they're more and more and more and more sophisticated. And as I've watched the whole UFO subculture sort of get involved with this whole fascination with abductions and implants, I went, yeah, but you know, EG&G is on one of the plants is on the edge of the Area 51. They're the ones manufacturing the implants that you're taking out of these abduction victims. Absolutely. They're not coming from outer space. They don't need that. If you're interstellar, you're transdimensional. If you're transdimensional, you don't need an RF frequency plant chip to track anybody, because their technologies are way beyond that. I said, this is human, 100%. And you better wake up. And so Powlick gave us this interview, and it was one of a dozen data points that I began to accumulate. And then not many years ago, I get a document, the next one, which is chilling. It's never been shown. It's from the Strategic Studies Institute, think tank, and it's dated 1995. And it was talking about all kinds of global security strategies. And, you know, you can look at it yourself. Cult-programmed graduates, blah, 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 who will be expected to participate in contrived UFO abduction scenarios. Listen carefully. All right. So I loathe reading to people but this, I will. And number 2, create a global UFO cult, which will involve, this is what needs to be done in order to actuate this false flag operation, that will involve the abduction of citizens so as to foster an illusion that this Earth is facing an extraterrestrial invasion. UFO abductees of preference will have an experience in computer technologies, since that expertise will be required in future technocratic RMA scenarios. Use of experimental drugs, holographic projection capabilities, directed energy technologies, I'll get into that in a moment, induced auditory input. These are the neurophones I mentioned that Werner von Braun said the most dangerous thing is the neurophone non-local things that can be done to make people think they're having an experience when they're not. Input, experimental aircraft, well, that's just a euphemism for man-made UFOs, and special effects costuming and stagecraft, among other things, will be used to persuade the abductees of the reality of their circumstances. Official denials regarding these events will employ reverse psychology to ensure that all such denials are taken as official confirmation of an imminent and/or ongoing extraterrestrial invasion. This is the next page. UFO abductees will be persuaded to worship their anticipated ET conquerors in cult-enforced religious fashion. UFO cult networks will be controlled by U.S. intelligence to limit infiltration and ensure that dissidents do not disrupt UFO long-term agendas. Uncontrollable dissidents will be assassinated, preferably by directed energy means. Dissociative satanic cult graduates will handle all such executions, i.e., when not actively lending logical and theatrical support to UFO abduction operations. Number 3, directed energy surveillance and weapons technology of all types and caps will be used for purposes of spreading fear and confusion in the population at large under deniable circumstances, for eliminating persons deemed adversarial to U.S. national security interests, and for spotting, assessing, and manipulating potential recruits to the RMA cause. Neurocybernetics and other psychotechnologies will be used to sow confusion and hypochondria in the population. The symptoms and effects produced by these and other directed energy technologies will parallel the effects produced by various microbes, viruses, and chemical imbalances, thus compelling a large segment of society to seek medical intervention, which in turn will be a basis for their being used for medical experimentation under voluntary circumstances. Psychiatrists and psychologists will play an important role in these experiments, particularly where denying the efficacy of neurocybernetics psychotechnologies is concerned. Citizens who complain of hearing voices will be used as a basis for generously government-funded schizophrenic-related brain research, on and on and on. It goes on. Now, if you're not falling out of your chair yet, what I want to tell you is that all of that has come to pass and came to pass between the 1950s and the 1970s.